Kia ora and welcome to Swim Chats, a podcast about swimming. I'm Shona Riddell, a writer and swimmer from Wellington, Aotearoa, New Zealand. For each episode, I talk to a different guest from our swim community. Please hit the follow button so you don't miss an episode. You can also leave a 5-star rating or review, which helps other people to discover the podcast. Please consider sharing this episode with a friend or two. And finally, to support the podcast and to help me continue running Swim Chats, you can become a swim buddy for $5 a month on Patreon. To find out more, go to patreon.com/swimchats. There's a link to it in the episode show notes. James, welcome to Swim Chats. Thanks for your time today.
No, thanks for inviting me.
So we're here today to discuss what I think is a fascinating and vibrant marine species, which is the sea sponge.
Yep.
So for listeners who don't know, would you mind describing what a sea sponge is?
I'll do my best. I guess sponges are kind of considered to be the simplest or some of the simplest of all the organisms on the planet, although they're not really simple at all. They're really quite complex. But they're essentially a bag of cells that sit together whose role, I guess, or main function is to suck in large quantities of water, strip out the tiny particles, and throw out the water again. They are animals. So there is, if you look back through the very early literature when people were describing plants and animals, they got confused and they were described several times as plants, but they are not. They are animals. They have animal cells. They're a collection of maybe 5 or 6 different cell types, and all of those cells function together to create this cool little animal. Well, not always
Cool.
little.
Thank you. And they can be very old, can't they? They've been around for a long time, but also they can grow to an old age.
They can, yeah. So they're again, I guess there's debates among different groups who work on different types of animals, but yeah, sponges can be thousands of years old. Some of the glass sponges up in Antarctica and some of the deep sea ones are thought to be thousands of years old. Obviously, they're inferred methods because nobody's been around looking at them for thousands of years. But it is even your kind of average sponge on the Wellington coast can have sat there for maybe 100 years. You know, just sat there sucking in water, stripping out the particles, spitting the water back out again, watching the occasional scuba diver go past. But generally they are often quite old.
Yeah. And how do we know how old they are?
That is a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I guess I don't know the answer to that question. Never
No,
been
that's
asked
all
that.
right.
Before. It's a
That's
good
all right. I've
question.
got plenty more questions, so we can.
Probably plenty more that I can't answer as well.
I know.
I mean, I know. I guess for the ones that don't grow so far, I know because people have observed them through time.
Mm,
So people have measured growth rates and inferred growth rates. But for some of those glass sponges, it will be based on chemical properties of the spicules. But I don't know the details beyond that. It's not an area
cool.
I work on.
And a lot of people will be familiar with corals. They will have been to coral reefs. And so, what's the difference between coral and a sponge?
Yeah, so I guess corals are the corals that people are mostly familiar with are probably the tropical corals that live on coral reefs. They're generally a more complicated animal. They have a set of tissues, so they have different sets of tissues. Sponges have no tissues. They're just kind of a collection of cells, all in this kind of matrixy material, the spongy material around it. Corals are often associated, or the ones on reefs, with calcification, and they form those reef structures. And typically, I say typically because there are some sponges that form reefs. Typically, sponges don't form on reefs; they tend to grow as a surface layer. They don't form the kind of consolidated hard structure that you would see of a coral reef. So that's probably the main difference. I guess the other thing is that corals are effectively, I guess, carnivores as well, if you like. A lot of them will feed on the zooplankton, so the bigger animals, big bigger than what sponges feed on. The tiny little animals that are floating around in the plankton, whereas sponges are more feeding on the smaller stuff, and generally focused on feeding on bacteria and phytoplankton.
Cool. Thank you. And sponges can, I mean, there's so many different types. They can be different colors, they can be different shapes. Some are big, some are small. Do we
Yeah.
know why there's so much variety? Does it depend on which part of the planet they're in?
This is a really good question. I'm really glad you didn't ask me why they're all different colours, because I have several of my colleagues here who joke with me all the time and want to know why the sponges are different colours and what is the ecological significance of that. And I have no idea whatsoever. It's something I've thought about a lot. Some of
If
the
only they could tell us.
Yeah, if only they could tell us, that would be cool. Ben, why do you get like these amazing brightly coloured sponges in an environment where there's no light and nobody can see them unless you shine the ROV on them? But so the kind of shapes and colours and variation you see, particularly the variation you see in kind of size and shape, often reflects the environment that sponges are found in. And how they're adapted to those environments. So often you find in areas where there's a lot of sediment, you'll find kind of sponges that will grow in kind of upright, kind of branching forms, and that's to stop the sediment actually landing on their surfaces. In other environments where there might be lots of wave action, for example, you'll find very thin crusting sponges or kind of massive, really kind of tough sponges. And that's to resist those water current and flow directions. There's a lot of debate, I guess, or has been a lot of debate why there are so many sponges in a particular environment that all look like they are the same, and how they've evolved when they all sort of do the same thing. Why there's so many of them, and we don't have a particularly great answer to that. There's a lot of sponges that do the same thing and live in very close proximity to them. And from a kind of evolutionary perspective, it's not super easy to explain how they've differentiated. But maybe that's because I've not looked hard enough.
Well, I like how there are still questions that we don't know yet. Like,
There are
there's a bit of
loads of
mystery.
questions,
Yeah,
loads of
yeah,
questions I
loads of
don't know.
questions.
Yes.
You mentioned sediment, and we are both in Wellington today. It's a wild day, even by Wellington standards. So we've got gale force winds, heavy rain, big swells on the south coast. How are Wellington sponges going to be coping with this weather?
Well, Wellington's an interesting place to be, especially the south coast for a sponge at the moment, because there's the ongoing sewage outflow issue. But from a sponge perspective, it's probably like heaven because there are all these bacteria and all these little tiny particles that are floating around that the sponges will be feeding on. The sediment sponges generally are pretty good with dealing with sediment. If you go to kind of very sedimented places, one of the things you often find there are sponges. They have a whole bunch of mechanisms for dealing with that. They can produce mucus, and that mucus kind of carries the sediment off their surfaces. They also have sometimes they have little skeletal bits that stick out, which actually prevent the sediment from getting in the sponge in the first place. So that a lot of sponges actually quite like sediment and are quite well adapted to those environments. The thing they don't like a lot of, or it turns out in New Zealand at least, is they don't like the heat. So that's the kind of bigger threat to sponges, I guess, around our coastline.
Right, that makes sense. And do sponges have any predators?
Yes. So the I guess the biggest predator of sponges would be nudibranchs. So there are lots of nudibranchs that are associated with specific types of sponges. There was a kind of an interesting, probably wasn't interesting for the people doing the research at NIWA, but there's an interesting story around a bunch of sponges that NIWA was growing for pharmaceutical purposes down in the Marlborough Sounds, and they grew several tons of this sponge that was worth a fortune because it contained all this compound that they were interested in, and they had a nudibranch outbreak that ate most of it. So they can be quite voracious predators of sponges. There are some fish that eat sponges. Leather jackets in particular are really well known sponge eaters, but they're not very nutritious sponge. It's lots of skeleton material in there. There's not a great deal of tissue, so they're not very nutritious things. In the tropics, turtles eat sponges, weirdly, and more fish than what you'd find in New Zealand. But New Zealand, there's not too many things that even other than those nudibranchs.
You mentioned that, sponges can have value to people. So they can be harvested for skincare, like,
Mhm.
bathroom sponges.
Yep.
Do they have any medical benefits?
Yeah, so one of the things so sponges have been investigated quite extensively for probably the last 30 or 40 years of sources of a range of kind of novel bioactive compounds. There's some debate as to whether or not it's the sponge that produces them or the microbes that live within the sponges. So sponges, although there are kind of 5 different cell types of the sponge, they live in association with millions and billions of little tiny bacteria. And a lot of my research is actually trying to focus on what those bacteria and those microbes do in the sponge and how they help the sponge. But in terms of uses, yeah, so there are lots of compounds that have been isolated from sponges that have potential as anti-cancer drugs, antimicrobial agents, and all sorts of things like that. So nowadays, a lot of that work is done in the lab. People take molecules and they make them better using AI and all of those kind of things. But a lot of the compounds, their starting point has been in marine organisms, and sponges seem to be a particularly important source of those. Yeah.
Did I feel like I read somewhere that they might have antidepressant properties, but
Possibly, yeah, I don't know. They've been investigating for all sorts of things. I don't know specifically for antidepressants. It's mostly kind of antifungal and anti-cancer agents that have been the most well studied. To my knowledge, though, I don't know if there are any specific molecules that have come from sponges that have made it to market. But part of that is the long duration in which it takes for things to be found, discovered, tested, and actually make it to market. And I think, as I say, these days technology has moved on from just taking a molecule straight from the kind of environment and then using it. It gets modified multiple times over by a computer and those kind of things before it would even come close to those things.
right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of ocean swimmers listen to this podcast, is are we likely to see sea sponges while we're swimming, or are they too deep for that?
No, so you can find them intertidally. So if you go down to the shore at very low tide and look at the kind of undersides of rocks, they don't do very well in when they're exposed to air, because they're pumping water. If they're out of the water, they tend to suck in air, and they can't get rid of it. So most of the sponges you'll see are subtidal, but they occur immediately below the waterline. So in amongst the kelps, if you look at the kind of underneath the kelp forests, you find all the kelp holdfasts, kelp holdfasts, and all the rock surface are coated in various different types of sponges. So yeah, you almost certainly would see them. You don't see them very often floating around if you're just out in the ocean. You need to have a look at the seafloor, but yeah, they're pretty common. I think New Zealand's got somewhere in the region, depending on who you ask and how you count them, somewhere between 800 and 1,200 different species of sponge.
Okay. And
Yeah.
I think I read that most sponges prefer, is it the mesophotic? Am I pronouncing that correctly? Like the
Yeah,
middle, like
that's it.
zone.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess it depends on the sponge species. It's just that there are more of them. So they occur in the kind of shallow waters down to about 30 meters where the kelp occurs, but the kelp tends to outcompete sponges. So if they're growing next to each other, the kelp will grow over or displace the sponge. Whereas below that zone where the kelp exists, we tend to see around New Zealand the environments are very much dominated by sponges. Also, there's less impact of things like wave action, so you get much more elaborate and more kind of shape diversity and with depth as well.
And so when you're scuba diving, how deep are you do you tend to go to do your
So the
research?
the university has a limit, so we can only go to 30 meters. And to be honest, I'm quite old these days, so 30 meters is plenty for me.
That sounds pretty deep
So
to me.
yeah, so I guess it depends on you ask. I mean, so yeah, so most of our research is probably done between 20 and 30 meters. As I say, when trying to get below that kind of kelp zone. And then below that, we use a range of remotely operated vehicles. So we're lucky enough to have we have 3 different remotely operated vehicles that we use to explore those areas, which are super spongy. So anything below 30 meters is typically super spongy around New Zealand.
And so those ROVs, how deep can they go?
So the ones we've got, they I guess they vary. So they're not like the ones that you might see on, I don't know, a huge research expedition that are the size of a car. Our ones are more the size of what would be a good like a fish bin or a chili bin would be a good example of the size of what our ROVs are like. And they vary. So our most expensive one, as it's set up at the moment, can reach about 300 meters. But with modifications, can potentially reach 900 meters. And the problem is we don't have enough cable to reach those depths. And you get kind of problems as you get deeper, sending the signal from the ROV up the cable to the surface. But typically, we work at down to maybe 150 to 180 meters maximum. Um,
So I
and that
imagine
all of
with
those.
the deep sea, there must be sponge species that we haven't even seen yet.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, we're out in the ROV on a regular basis, and we're forever looking at things, and we go, yeah, there's another orange sponge that we don't know what it is. I'd said there's kind of 800 to 1,200 species in New Zealand. That number is broad because there are tons that are just sat on a shelf in different places around New Zealand that haven't been described and don't have names. You could almost be assured that even if you went out on the Wellington South Coast, had a swim round, collected up everything you found, you would find species that are undescribed, almost certainly. Just because nobody's had the time yet to describe those things.
So for the classifications we have in New Zealand, for example, with birds or other wildlife, we have vulnerable species, we have endangered. Do we have endangered sponge species? Are
No.
they classified in a similar way?
No, we don't have any sponge species that are on the NZ threat classification, and I guess that's largely because maybe nobody's asked or pushed, and we don't know if there are any that are threatened. There just isn't enough information to know. We do know that some sponges have been quite negatively impacted by marine heat waves in recent years, but we don't have anything that any sponges that are on that list. There are a bunch of corals that we work on, like black corals and things like that. They're listed on those threat classification schemes, but not the sponges yet. Yeah, hopefully.
Do you think, you know, not many people would see sponges or know about them necessarily? Are they overshadowed by the more charismatic megafauna type species?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm
Yeah,
not a huge fan of charismatic megafauna, I have to say. I think they get far too much of the time. I mean, my group has spent a lot of time trying to highlight the importance of sponges. I think I think particularly once you put the ROV in the water and show people videos of what it looks like below the depth that they can reach as a scuba diver, you realize actually they're probably, in terms of biomass, they've probably got as much biomass as all of those charismatic megafauna that people are interested in. And they're really just underexplored and underappreciated component of our marine communities. I mean, I also appreciate that everybody, whatever group of organisms they work on, probably says that. But I guess in our case, I have the data to show that below 30 meters on rocky substrates, they're the most abundant thing by
yeah.
far. Yeah,
You have an Instagram handle called Sponge Ecology, and
I do.
yeah,
Yes,
you've got over 40,000 followers,
I
and
have.
growing.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're sort of showcasing sponges that you see around the world, sort of set to ethereal music, all these beautiful underwater colours. You're sort of
Yeah,
bringing them up to the surface for people to see.
yeah.
Do you consider yourself a bit of a sponge advocate?
Yeah, I think when I arrived in New Zealand, which is 20 years ago now, and I asked people just on the Wellington South Coast if there were many sponges, people were like, "Oh no, not really. There's not really any there that we've seen." And I think it's just again that people hadn't focused particularly on sponges in New Zealand. It was an underexplored area.
Mm,
I kind of all of the research that we do, we like to share as much as we can with people. Social media has been a really great way of doing that. But for our sponge projects and generally whenever we publish a paper, we also put out a press release. We release a bunch of videos to try and explain what it is we found and why it's important to try and engage people. And I think people have a little bit more of an understanding. At least it was it was probably a couple of months or so ago. Doc were making some new posters for somewhere, and they sent it to me because amazingly they had sponge gardens and sponges on their posters that they'd never had before. And I think there's definitely a growing awareness that sponges in these environments are important. But the thing is, at the moment, is we're still trying to figure out exactly why they're important. So we don't have that piece of the puzzle, and we have various projects that are ongoing to try and demonstrate, links between the sponge gardens and I guess the things that people care more about, the things that they eat, and how important those sponge gardens are to those species.
mm. When did you first become interested in sponges?
That's a good question. I shouldn't admit this, but I actually always wanted to work on corals. I got the opportunity when I was an undergraduate student to travel to a place called Lochine Marine Nature Reserve, which is a small, tiny sea loch. Which is, I have to say, if any of your listeners want to go and do ocean swimming somewhere else, it is a hot spot for ocean swimming. You can swim there pretty much any time of the year because it's super sheltered. This tiny little sea loch that people swim round and round and round in. When I did my PhD, nobody was into ocean swimming, so there was nobody there swimming in the loch. But nowadays, it's super popular. But I went there as an undergraduate. It was a really remote place, and I actually did my undergraduate project on corals at this place. After I finished my undergraduate degree, an opportunity came up for a PhD, but it was focused on sponges and not corals at the same location in Ireland. And I guess I was interested in sponges, and I realized I guess there was a little bit of a niche because everybody wanted to work on corals and nobody wanted to work on anything else other than corals at the time, because all the kind of coral bleaching and those kind of things that were going on. And I think that's where my interest. I like the idea of doing something that was different to what everybody else was doing, and I think I think kind of career-wise, I've been lucky that a number of the places I've been, I've found that are really spongy, where people haven't looked. And it's been super great for me that with the advent of kind of ROV technology and looking in these deeper environments, that they're all dominated by sponges, which is really cool for me. Kind of luck more than anything else, I guess. But yeah, so it's kind of grown from there. Over time, I've worked on a whole bunch of other things, and none of them have held my interest as much as working on sponges. It's that idea that something has been around on the planet for so many hundreds of millions of years,
Mm.
literally just sucking in water, eating the particles, spitting them back out again, and has survived all those extremes and all those things that have gone on the planet. I think is super cool.
It's
Yeah,
incredible, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
it
you
is.
mentioned Loch before, and I was Googling that yesterday. So
Mm.
it's in Ireland, and you mentioned it's a sea loch. So
Yeah.
it's a lake, right? But it's salt water.
Yes. Yeah. So it depends who
How
you
does that
ask.
work?
It's a lake or not, but it's a sea lock. Yeah, fully marine.
So how does that work? It's how is it connected to
Yeah,
the
it's got
ocean?
this super cool little tiny connection that looks like a river, which connects it to. If you look it up online and look at a picture of it, it looks like it's connected by this tiny little channel, and it's only about 25 meters wide, and it creates this really unusual tidal regime. So normally a tide goes in for 6 hours, as I'm sure there is. No tide goes in for 6 hours, out for 6 hours. In Lochine, it doesn't. There's like a ridge that runs across this little channel that feeds the loch, and the tide outside has to reach the level of this channel before it can start to flow in. So you get it's all calm in the loch, and then the tide reaches this level of the sill, and then it rushes in really fast. So you get this kind of 3 or 4 meter currents in the entrance to the loch, and you can kind of literally surf your way into the loch. And then it slows down really fast, and you get this really wide range of environments within a really small area, and get this really high exceptional biodiversity. It's more like what you find in the kind of in the deeper water. So it's a bit like a mesophotic ecosystem, but in maybe 5 to 20 meters of water.
Oh wow! I can
Yes, very cool
definitely
place.
know some people who would be keen to go there and
Yeah,
swim there.
honestly, honestly, it's my favorite place on the planet. Easily my favorite place on the planet. Yeah.
Well, when a lot of people picture working as a marine biologist, they imagine sort of playing with whales and, being in the ocean all the time. But your life really does seem pretty exciting. Like, I know I'm only following your Instagram, but you seem to travel to a lot of really cool places
Hmm.
and you've seen things that most people don't get to see.
Yeah, thank you. I do. I am very lucky in all of the opportunities I get and the things that I see. I guess, yeah, people do imagine marine biologists work with whales and dolphins, but I have to say, I don't know anybody who works with whales and dolphins. They all work on the things that I consider are much cooler than whales and dolphins.
Yeah.
But whales and dolphins are cool too, to be fair. But I have a little bit of a I probably shouldn't say this as you record it, but my students are often joke with me because I don't particularly love dolphins, particularly since we had a recent experience on the Wellington south coast with a bunch of dolphins. When we had the ROV in the water, and one of the dolphins unfortunately swam through the cable and snapped the cable of the ROV.
Oh,
And I'm
no.
pretty sure afterwards it jumped out of the water and it looked like it was making a funny noise and laughing at me. But for all my students, I need to take them as well. So,
Interfering.
well, yeah, interfere. I don't know who's interfering with. They're interfering with my research, or I'm interfering with them. One of the two. But it
It's
makes
just,
me love dolphins a little bit less.
yeah, it's just more of that charismatic megafauna trying
It
to
is,
get
yeah. It's
your
just
attention,
just mocking me. I think.
distract you.
Yeah.
I know that you travel to Fiordland quite regularly. Is that a spongy hotspot?
Yeah, Fjordland's a super cool environment because of the kind of unusual hydrology and geography. You get the what they call the low salinity layer. So because of all the rain in Fjordland, all of the tannins and stuff get washed off the land, and they create this kind of really dark environment in a in very shallow waters. What it means is you get a whole bunch of species that are normally found in deeper water in much shallower water. So whereas normally we would need an ROV to explore kind of mesophotic environments, in Fjordland you can just jump in the water and you're immediately in a mesophotic environment. So basically that means that it's full of sponges and full of the other things that I really like, such as the black corals. So yeah, so we do a lot of work in Fjordland. It's also one of those places that I feel we're very spoiled going there all the time and we forget how remote it is. It's a great place for research because you can pretty much work nearly every day. There are some places like on Wellington, as you know, you're in Wellington. I'm sure you look out the window and think, no marine biologist will be going out there this month because of the weather's so bad. But in Fjorden, we can pretty much always find somewhere to work. So it's great to be able to have that opportunity. But it's got just such amazing communities. Like some of the rock walls down there are just absolutely plastered with marine life. It's not just sponges, but all little bryozoans and black corals and hard corals and all sorts of cool creatures.
I'm
Yeah.
actually spending a week down in Fiordland next February on a swim adventure
Oh
where
yeah.
we sleep on a boat and swim every day. And so it sounds like from what you said that I will be able to see some sponges there. And
You will. So if you're towards, so the low salinity layer makes it difficult unless you need to duck dive down below probably 5 meters. Depends which fjord you're going to.
mm,
Whereabouts are you heading to?
dusky sound, I think.
Dusky, yeah. So Dusky is easier. So in Doubtful, you've got the Manapori power station, which pumps out loads and loads of fresh water, which makes it super dark in Doubtful, particularly in the head of the fjords. But yeah, if you're towards the outer parts of the fjords, you would be able to duck down and see some sponges. It'd be a great place to swim down there. You might see
Yeah,
dolphins or
yeah.
penguins and all those cool things. Yeah.
And you mentioned black coral. Is it
Mm.
black because of the tannins? Is that unrelated?
No, so people kn so it isn't actually black at all. It's called a black coral, but it actually looks white. So when you
Oh,
see it, they look like they almost look like they're bleached. And people have got confused before because they, "Oh my god, it should be black 'cause it's called a black coral." But it's the skeleton that's black. So if the coral dies and you can see if it looks black, then it probably means it's dead. So they're bright white. So yeah, they're called black corals, but they're actually a whole bunch of different colors sometimes. And the ones in Fiordlands are typically white when they're alive and black when they're dead.
yeah. Okay, thank you. And
Confusing.
yeah, that's confusing.
Yeah.
Speaking of Fiordland, a few years ago, the sponges down there made international headlines
Right.
when you discovered there was some bleaching going on. And was that related to warmer than average water temperatures?
Yeah, so
Mm.
the story is that I guess would have been probably March time. A bunch of my students were down in Fjordland, and one of them sent me a video saying, "What do you reckon this is? It looks really weird. All these sponges look really strange." And they sent me the video, and it was quite clear that there were all of a sudden all of these white sponges. The strange thing is we'd never really paid a great deal of attention to the species itself before. We've been there quite a few times. It turns out that that's probably because it's normally a browny color and it just blends into everything else and doesn't look particularly fantastic. But because it was bright white, we could see these fields of this sponge, which turns out to be one of the most abundant sponges in Fiordland. And we started chatting to a few people and ran our own little expedition down there and found that pretty much all across Fiordland, these sponges had turned white. We did a whole bunch of investigations in the lab, and also had a look at the ocean temperatures in Fiordland at the time. And Fiordland had been through a marine heat wave that had lasted over 200 days, and its peak had reached about 4 degrees warmer than what it should be at that time of the year. And the time of year it was is when Fiordland is the warmest too. So it reached probably not far off 20 degrees C, which is unheard of in Fiordland. We took a whole bunch of sponges later back to the lab after the bleaching had happened, and we subjected them to temperature and found we got the same sort of result as well, suggesting that that high temperature would cause the bleaching in the sponges. The slightly sad thing is that we estimated in total there were around about 50 million of those sponges in Fjordland, and we reckon about half of them died. So about 25 million sponges died during that marine heatwave event.
Mm.
So it's pretty significant. Yeah.
That brings me to, oh, sorry, I was going to say another question I had just, for you as a marine ecologist researching sponges,
Mm.
things like that must be pretty hard to see. Like, how do
Yeah,
you,
yeah, yeah. The sponge story is an interesting one because that event has led to a whole, I guess, avenue of research by my group focused on effectively the sponges that didn't die. So while half of the sponges die, we were really interested to know why the other half didn't die. There might be one sponge that bleached and died next to another one. There might be one that sat there that didn't bleach at all. And it's led to a whole avenue of research. It's just got quite a big grant funding from the Royal Society of New Zealand Marsden Fund to investigate the role of the microbes in the sponges and how the sponges might be able to swap and change their microbes to deal with these extreme events. Because we found that the sponges that had survived the marine heat wave had different microbes in them compared to what they did before the marine heat wave. So they'd shuffled and changed these microbes inside them. And we
so
know
they've,
from years of other people's research that these microbes are really important for helping the sponge survive. And it's led to this whole bunch of research focused on, well, maybe sponges can switch their microbes and now enable them to deal with climate change pressures. So while seeing all of those sponges die is very depressing, and I have to say with the ROV, we quite often see quite depressing things. I've seen um, only a few months ago some really large trawl nets over the top of a seamount off Mayor Island. That was very depressing, seeing, kind of this huge net just covering these beautiful glass sponge gardens. Recently, up in the Hauraki Gulf, we've seen areas where there are fields of dead black corals. Again, probably climate related. So you do see these things, and it's quite depressing sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess like doing the research must give you a feeling of purpose that you're solving some of these mysteries and
Yeah,
hopefully
yeah. You do. It's more like, I guess some of it is about understanding whether or not organisms are going to adapt, and if there's ways in which we can help or mitigate that. A lot of the time, I guess probably much of the research I've done over the last 10 or 15 years has been about trying to find out thresholds for things like sediment, how much, well, sponges like sediment, and other things like sediment, how much sediment is too much. And then you can use those kind of figures to, I guess, inform environmental policy as to what you might allow in terms of activities that generate sediment. But seeing that science translated into something meaningful is very challenging and very difficult as a scientist. It's one of the things I find most frustrating about my job is you find out these cool, important things, but getting it to be uptaken into policy is something quite different.
this is a question I was going to ask at the end, but I'll ask it now. A lot of people listening will be ocean swimmers who care about the sea and connect with the sea. Is there anything we can do to help? Like, is there any sort of call to action that people can take just from listening to this episode that would be useful?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody. So we worry about climate change a lot, and I think that we while we can all make our little bit in terms of climate change, the slightly sad thing is that us in New Zealand doing our little thing isn't going to probably change some of those impacts of climate change. But what we need to remember is that in New Zealand, all of those other things that affect the marine environment, those are things that we directly control. So as taxpayers and voters, how much sediment goes into the marine environment can be controlled by New Zealand and our environmental agencies. We don't have to chop down trees. We don't have to put plastics in the marine environment. Those are all things that are under our control. So I guess it's about being aware of those issues and speaking out for nature. Nature can't speak for itself, and it's important for us to highlight what those issues are, and I guess potentially look for solutions too. And I guess it's also important to be kind of pragmatic, and we're never going to stop catching fish out of the sea, but it's about making sure that we give nature a voice and make sure that we think about ways to sustainably manage those things that we want to extract from the marine environment. So not really a call to action, but people just shouldn't see everything as being very depressing. There are things that are likely to survive the climate stresses that we see, like some sponges, and there are things that may adapt, and there may be new things that arrive here that maybe we don't want but come anyway. But there are things that we can control to reduce those impacts of climate change, those local stresses that we can reduce.
Yeah, that's well said. Thank you. And on a more positive note, you won a photo competition last year for one of your
I
sponge
did win a
photos.
photo competition. Yeah, yeah, I did win a photo competition for a picture of a sponge, or from a picture taken from within inside a sponge looking outwards. Which I have to say I didn't give a lot of thought to at all. I felt really bad because I'm sure some of the other people's pictures looked really cool. But mine didn't take a lot of thought at all. I just stuck my 360 camera inside a sponge and wondered what it looked like, and it turned out it looked really cool.
Well, yeah, it looked amazing. I'll share a photo in the show notes
Okay.
so people can see
Yeah,
it. But
I've never won a photo competition before, and several of the people in my research group are really great photographers and take really amazing pictures, and I think they were a little bit miffed I won with my Insta 360 picture of the inside of a sponge. But to be fair, I was at the sponge conference, so I did have a slight advantage to the
right, and
spongy
also
thing.
you might be the first person in the world. I don't know, but I'm just claiming this. But to take a photo from inside a sponge.
Yeah, I think that possibly, quite possibly. Yeah, yeah. I've been racking my brains since the conference, which is now nearly a year ago, as to how I'm going to beat it next time. But I've been given the. Although we are hosting, so Victoria University is hosting the next international sponge conference in January 2028. So I might change the rules around the photograph competition to suit them well.
Oh, that's exciting. So we're having an international sponge conference in Wellington. Can anybody go, or is it just
Anybody can go. I guess, unfortunately, you have to pay to come. You could sneak in at the back because it's the university and probably nobody would notice. And I'm not sure any of your listeners would probably want to spend 4 days listening to a bunch of sponge nerds talking about sponges. But there probably
uh,
will be some public events, or at least a public lecture as part of that, about sponges. I don't know what form that'll take, but there will be some public outreach you do associated with the conference too.
maybe we could have some sort of corresponding ocean swim for sponges
Mm,
event.
that's a
I'm
great
always
idea.
looking for any
That's
excuse
a
to
great idea.
go for an ocean swim. So yeah,
Yeah.
something to think about for 2028. We've got
Yeah,
time
it'd
to
be just
plan
gonna be
it.
warm. It'd be warm in summer as well. It'd be the perfect time to go.
It will be definitely warmer than it is
Yeah.
today. Cool. I'm just scrolling through my notes now because oh, yeah, so you've you've become a bit of a sponge spokesperson as well because you do a lot of sponge research. You're often interviewed about sponges, so people have probably heard you on RNZ or seen you on TV news
Mhm.
talking about sponges. How do you find the public facing aspect of your job?
Kind of embarrassing, to be honest. I hate when people come up and go in the we were on a boat show the other week, and somebody recognised me from my Instagram account, and I was with my son, who also is quite an avid fisherman, and also has his own quite popular TikTok account. And I think he was just, I don't know if he was embarrassed or he was annoyed that the person didn't recognise him. I find it it's very nice to talk to people, but I find it kind of embarrassing, and it's kind of matching that real world with things that you do online. Yeah, I don't love it, to be honest. Otherwise, I probably would feature more myself in my Instagram account rather than videos of things.
Right. I like how you
You
said the
find
sponge though.
Sorry, say again?
I like how you send to the sponge. Like you have the sponge point of view in your pictures, and
Yeah, yeah,
you
I
make
guess
them the star.
yeah, I guess it's more about awareness, you know? I guess like I'm sure lots of people get fed on social media, there are lots of other organisations in New Zealand who, feed a lot of conservation stuff. I kind of, I kind of want my message to be that we should care about these things, but you also need to appreciate they're amazing, and there are still amazing things to capture out there. A lot of the stuff I get fed around conservation and management, I find quite depressing
Yeah.
online, and I try to avoid those, those really depressing messages. Except when it comes to the sewage on Wellington South Coast, because I find that really makes me angry and really makes me annoyed.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually took our ROV out for the first time to the south coast and looked at the rocky reefs either side of the entrance to Lyall Bay this week. And the water quality, maybe a kilometre or so away, is horrible. It's terrible. It's really really nasty. It doesn't look like all the sponges are probably loving it because of all the extra food, but and it doesn't look like it's having too much impact on the marine environment, which is good. But I guess if you were ocean swimming, that's probably not somewhere you would want to be ocean swimming right at the moment. Mhm.
I it makes me angry too. It's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me
Um,
annoying that people kind of a lot of people seem to have just forgotten about it and moved on. It doesn't seem to make as many people angry as it should do, in my view.
I think a lot of people assume it's been fixed because it's
Right,
been
that's
so
right.
long,
Yeah,
and people
that's
don't see it. Right.
right. Yeah, yeah, that's right.
What are some other parts of the world where you've been diving and seen incredible sponges?
Um, I've been all over. Probably the most incredible place for sponges is Indonesia. So I've been lucky enough to travel to Indonesia for the last 20, I think it's worth nearly 25 years. Again, seen lots of changes over those times. Lots of places. So a lot of my earlier research was focused on understanding what happens. This is really, really depressing research as well, on what happens when corals decline in tropical reef environments and basically what takes over. And it might not surprise you to know that in many places, what takes over are sponges. So I've travelled to been lucky enough to go to lots of tropical places to look at sponges, and some of the spongy places you see are just amazing. You see these giant barrel sponges that you can literally get in. They're so big. Not that you should, but you could if you wanted to. Again, it's probably been sat there for like 500 years, just again sucking in the water, stripping out
Yes.
the particles and chucking the water out again. And all these things have happened around it, and it's just sat there.
So
I've done a lot
how
of
big? Sorry, how big can a sponge grow? Like, what is the biggest sponge?
oh, there was an article a while ago about the biggest sponge. So I think the biggest sponges I've seen would be several meters across. So some of the giant barrel sponges, a lot of them unfortunately have have perished in recent years due to temperature. Barrel sponges don't love temperature increases, but it wouldn't be unusual, but probably 30, 40, 50 meters to see barrel sponges that maybe a meter and a half to 2 meters across. They can be pretty giant. There are other
Mm.
ones that are encrusting. So sometimes it's hard to tell as well because you might have an encrusting species that's really thin, that's actually been there for 500 years, but over time it's gone into lots of different little patches. So it might actually be the same sponge, but because you're only looking at it at one point in time, it might sometimes grow back together again. Then it might get eaten a bit and it separates out, and then the patches grow in this direction. So it could be really big, but you just don't know.
And is
Um,
that how it reproduces as well? Like bits of it fall off?
Yeah, so it can reproduce by fragments. It produces kind of eggs, larvae, and sperm like all other animals. But yeah, they're quite well known for kind of reproducing clonally. So you can get most sponges and you can break them into pieces, and then you can got more sponges. And that's how we collect sponges for a lot of our lab work. We don't take whole sponges often. We take bits of sponges. So we have kind of minimal impact then on the environment. So we might take half a sponge and leave the other half in the environment, so it'll grow back.
Mm,
Might take
okay.
a while, but it will grow
Yeah.
back.
And sorry I interrupted you. You were talking about different parts of the world where you've been
Yeah, so
doing
I've
research.
different sponges in different places. I guess I've been lucky enough to travel and look at sponges in the Galapagos, New Caledonia, Great
Mm.
Barrier Reef, Papua New Guinea, which was really cool. Looking at the sponges that live at the shallow water CO2 vents. Done a lot of work in Ireland and the UK over the years, and bits and pieces in the Mediterranean, Red Sea, yeah, Curacao, Caribbean, all sorts of great places. Still my
Wow.
favourite place, I have to say, still my favourite place to go is cold Loch Island. I was there 10 days ago, and the temperature, even though it was supposed to be summer in Loch Island, it was actually warmer at my house in the Wairarapa than what it was in midwinter than what it was in midsummer in Ireland. But yeah.
Oh, right. 'Cause,
Mm.
Europe's in the middle of a heat wave, but
Yeah, I
there's
don't
Ireland
think don't think
that
Ireland does heat waves, a heat wave in Ireland
exactly.
is just about 2 degrees warmer than normal, but where we were, it was still absolutely freezing. There was definitely no sign of a heat wave, more of a cold wave. Mm.
And when you're not, diving around the world, you're, professor of marine ecology at, Victoria University of Wellington, Te Herenga
Yep.
Waka, and I think I read somewhere that this is your 20th year there, is that
It is.
right?
It is my 20th year coming to New Zealand. I came to New Zealand for my job at the university. I guess like maybe a lot of people who come to New Zealand thought I might stay for a few years, and then go somewhere else. And then 20 years has disappeared past, and I'm not sure if I'll get another 20 years, but hopefully I'll get a few more. At least until I need another five because I think they give me a special morning tea for being here for 25 years. So I want to get that.
Oh, you're waiting for the morning tea.
Yeah, wait for morning tea, and then I retire or give up after that.
You reach that milestone.
Yeah.
And so I know you spend a lot of time teaching what are mostly younger students. So do you see from them sort of does it give you hope seeing the younger generation? Like, do they look at things with a different perspective from you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the most enjoyable things of my job is an undergraduate marine biologist comes in. They come in very green. We went for a stage probably 10 years ago where there was a lot of doom and gloom in kind of marine conservation and marine ecology generally, we found a lot of our degrees and things we taught made people seriously quite depressed because there
Mm,
weren't solutions to any of the problems that we were highlighting in our courses. I think in more recent years, there's very much a balance between making sure students understand that there are all these problems, but there are these potential solutions too. And particularly to the things I was talking about before in terms of local scale problems that can be managed. But for me, the biggest enjoyment I get out of my job is seeing particularly my postgraduate students leave and then go on to do better things than I've done. I think if they can do better things than me, then that's awesome. If they can make a difference, loads of my graduates work at places like Doc, MD, research organisations like Earth Sciences New Zealand, Cawthron, and I know that they're all doing all these cool things, and I think that's really awesome. That gives me a huge amount of satisfaction to know that while I'm just working on sponges, they're solving the real problems that New Zealand and other places in the world have got. But yeah, I think teaching and interacting with students is the well, it's why people. Well, I think not all my colleagues, but I think that's why most people work at the university is to have that interaction with young people and hopefully keep you a little bit grounded as to how people feel. Not that I pretend to understand what it's like. really to be a student these days compared to when I was a student. So I think it's considerably harder for a whole bunch of different reasons. But yeah, it's certainly good to interact with young people. Keeps you young and on your toes. And they ask really hard
Yeah, sure.
questions.
And speaking of younger people and just the world changing, I was going to ask if AI is, if you're using AI in your research at all, like for example with the ROVs, are they able to do image recognition and analysis, all that sort of thing?
Yeah, so AI is changing all sorts of different things from the some of the annoying things that the university asked me to do that now can be done by AI in 2 or 3 seconds. Um, But, in terms of research, there are quite a huge number of opportunities. Even things like, check when we're running an experiment, checking it, having a chat with AI to
Mm.
test our experimental design, and look for flaws in things that we do. In terms of the ROV and footage, there is we so I spend or have spent over the last 10 years a huge amount of money paying students to look at images to work out the abundance and percentage cover of different things. We've been trialing for a number of different places and a number of different projects, replacing people with AI, which is a bit sad for my students, but a bit saves me a fortune. It means I can spend it elsewhere. For the work that we've done, we reckon it's about 80% as good as a human. So it's right about 80% of the time compared to a human. And depending on who you give that 80% number to, it depends on the look on their face as to whether or not they think that's a good or a bad thing. For a scientist like me, being 80% right is not particularly great. I want to be more certain than that. But for an environmental manager who's got limited money and no money to pay anybody to look at images they collect, being 80% correct is probably pretty good. You're probably going to detect some really huge change if it happens without spending any money. So there's a lot of potential for AI to help. At the university itself, it's a challenge in terms of teaching and assessments and those kind of things, and it's revolutionising the way that we assess students. We spend a long time, for example, moving away from having exams in courses. Students don't like exams; they're stressful. Nobody can write any more of those things. But AI is now making us rethink that, and we're having to go back to exams to make sure we have some, I guess, quality assessment in terms of or quality control in terms of the assessment and what our graduate students leave with.
And
Which is
you're the program director of marine biology, is that right?
I am, yes. Yep, a title
And
which just gives me lots of paperwork.
you can give that to the AI
Hopefully.
soon.
Yeah, hopefully.
um, and you run the Master of Marine Conservation.
That's
Do you
correct,
want to
yeah.
give that a little plug while we're here?
So we have 2 master's programs at the university. Unfortunately, these days, competition has become tough for, marine biology jobs. So the reality is if anyone wants to be a marine biologist, leaving with a degree is probably not gonna get you into the field. You're gonna need to do postgraduate study. So we have 2 master's programs. One of our master's programs is the Master of Marine Conservation, which is a taught master's program. So you don't have to do a research thesis. You come and do a whole bunch of courses, marine conservation, fisheries. You can pick all sorts of things across the university, and you leave after a year. And that's generally targeted at people who see themselves working for maybe DOC or one of the other government agencies. Our second master's is something that people are probably maybe a bit more familiar with, where there's a year of taught courses and then there's a kind of research thesis. So we have these different pathways for people. Some people don't want to do a thesis, they want to do a master's, but they don't want to do research. They want to be able to understand research, but don't want to do it themselves. So we offer these different opportunities. And I should say we have pretty good success in terms of our graduates and people getting jobs in marine biology. If you decide to stay on after a master's and do a PhD, I've had probably 40 odd PhD students since I've been at Vic in my 20 years, and all of them, except those who've decided marine biology isn't a thing for them anymore, have jobs in marine biology. So it's a very
Mm,
high, as you move up the educational scale, the chances of a job are high.
yeah. Cool. And for the masters, is there a set number of placements that people can apply?
Not there is, but not that we ever reach it. Marine biology is a competitive field. Some people want to come and Vic and study. Some people go elsewhere. One of the cool features of our master's program is that we have a tropical marine biology field course. So we're the only people in New Zealand who offer that. So our master students have the opportunity to learn about tropical issues as well as temperate cold water and polar issues too, which is quite a unique thing that we offer.
Mm. And because this is a swim podcast, I'm going to ask, are you a swimmer as well as a diver?
I am a swimmer, and I knew you were probably going to ask me about this because one of the things I have to do every year to maintain my diving credentials at the university is our swim test. And I have to say, for years and years and years, I tried to avoid having to do the swim test, and then about 10 years ago, we didn't have a choice anymore. So I am a swimmer. I swim probably 3 or 4 times a week, but I largely swim to make sure that I can pass my swim test, and I largely swim in the pool. I have to say, I do a lot of snorkeling.
Mhm.
Um, I quite like to go snorkeling, particularly in the tropics, I have to say, you can see a bit more. But yeah, so I am a swimmer, and I have to say I hate the swim test. Everybody hates the swim test. I know before I arrive at the annual swim test that I can pass it, but it doesn't make it any easier or less stressful. And
I'm
usually
sorry to
I normally practice as well. So I normally every time I go swimming, I normally would do the swim test first as my kind of warm up. So I
just
know that
get
I
it
can
over with.
pass it. Yeah, and I normally know that on the day I normally swim it twice as fast as what I do at home in the pool because I'm so stressed.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'm sorry to ask you more about the swim test because I can I can see that you really don't like it.
No,
But I'm
don't like.
interested in the criteria. What does the swim test involve?
So the swim test involves it for your listeners. They'll be like, "Oh, that just sounds like what we do for the first 10 minutes," and it isn't particularly onerous. So it's a 400-meter free swim. It's timed, and you get a certain number of points depending on how fast you go. Then there is a 800-meter swim with a snorkel and fins, and that's the same. So it's timed again, and depending on how fast or slow you go, you get a certain number of points. Then there is a 20-meter underwater swim. There is a tread water for, I would say, 11 minutes, and then 3 minutes with your hands in the air, which
Mm,
everybody hates. And then there's a tow. We have to tow each other up and down the pool in a certain amount of time as well. So it depends on how many points you get. So you have to get a right number of points. And it's fair to say I did lobby a few years ago to change the point weightings to make it a little bit easier. So I was thinking of my future self when I'm older and can't swim very far.
yeah, yeah. It sounds pretty intense, I have to say. Is that does it tend to be at Freiburg Pool?
Yes, it does. Yeah, yeah, and it would also be nice. So we're always financially strapped for cash at the university. So we share a lane. So there'd be like 10 of us in a lane as well. So it's more stressful because some people are fast and some people are slow. Some people are in your way, or you're in the way of people. That's why I hate it so much. Yeah, put it
Yeah,
in a couple of
it
months.
it doesn't sound like much fun, I have to say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it also is if you fail it or you don't do it, then you can't dive. So it's quite a big deal if you don't pass it.
yeah.
Sometimes people do
Um,
fail. Some students
if you
do
do
fail.
fail, can you resit it?
You can. You normally have to wait 3 months though, because we don't do it very often.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's
And
a
so
big deal.
remind me, how often do you have to do the test?
Only once a year.
Once a year? That's still quite, I mean, it must come around pretty fast.
It does come around, but it is
Yeah,
everybody's worst day, except the
yeah,
dive officer who love just looking at everybody swimming as hard as they can, looking really stressed.
yeah. Well, we're coming up on an hour. I've really enjoyed our chat. Is there anything else you want to mention that we haven't already covered?
No, I don't think so. It's great to chat to you. I hope people here enjoy hearing a little bit about sponges. And you
I'm
should
sure
follow
they
me on
will.
Instagram if you want to hear more.
Yes, everyone should follow James on Instagram, Sponge Ecology. I'll put
Yeah.
the link in the show notes. All right, thank you, James.
Oh, no
Appreciate your
worries.
time.
Yeah, glad we finally managed to catch up as well.
Yeah, exactly. It took a while, and yeah, we didn't have a power cut, so bonus. Thanks for listening to Swim Chats. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a friend or two. Also remember to hit follow to be notified when I post new episodes. To help other people discover the podcast, you can rate and review it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. If you're a regular listener, please visit patreon.com/swimchats to support the pod. Enjoy the water, and we'll see you next time.